Hello and welcome to today's Channelcast, Protect Data from the Cloud in the Cloud, introducing Carbonite Backup for Office 365, sponsored by the Channel Company and Carbonite. My name is Ed Hannon, and I'm excited to be moderating today's Channelcast. Now first, to ensure you and the audience get the most from today's event, I have a few announcements and suggestions for you. At any time, you're free to ask questions of our presenters. You can submit those questions by typing them in the Q&A box in the top right-hand corner of the console. Second, the presenters will advance the slides for you automatically, so you don't have to do anything except listen and take in the presentation. And you can also download a copy of the slides by clicking on the Downloads button, which is also located in the top right-hand corner of the console. And finally, if you have any technical problems, please let us know by clicking on the Help button located in the top right-hand corner of the console. Joining me today is Jamie Zajac, the Senior Director of Product Management with Carbonite. And before I turn it over to Jamie, I'm going to talk for a couple of minutes about sort of the opportunity that's available to you and sort of some things you need to keep in mind when you're evaluating your options. So when we talk about the opportunity, let's talk about Office 365. And the idea here being that the adoption of it continues to soar. And you can see, the Office 365 commercial revenue jumped 31% year over year through quarter two of this year, which ended in June 30th, 2019. Also, Microsoft has nearly 35 million Office 365 consumer subscribers, which, again, is not exactly the audience that we're talking about today, but it does give you an idea of just how big this market is. And also, in the quarter that ended June 30th, Microsoft added support for 12 spoken languages and over 60 on-screen captions or subtitle languages to PowerPoint, the ability to scan receipts or table-based information from a mobile phone automatically into Excel, the ability to add reactions to presentations in Whiteboard, secure creation and sharing of videos on mobile devices with Microsoft Stream, and GDPR compliance for Yammer messages for EU users. And also keep in mind that Office 365 has built-in security, and that Microsoft recommends users complete these tasks. And you can see here, with Office 365 Business Premium, things like set up multi-factor authentication, training users, using dedicated admin accounts, raising the level of protection against malware and mail, protecting against ransomware, and stopping auto-forwarding for email. Whereas with Microsoft 365 Business, the other edition also includes using Office message encryption, protecting email from phishing attacks, protecting against malicious attachments and files with ATP safe attachments, and protecting against phishing attacks with ATP safe links. Now, when we talk about Office 365 data protection, there is a myth and there's a reality. The myth is that Microsoft is responsible for protecting that Office 365 data, whereas the reality is it's the users who are responsible for protecting that data. And before I turn it over to Jamie, I just, one thing I want to touch on real quickly here is when we talk about, what could go wrong and some things that you do want to at least be aware of with as this goes on. Know that Microsoft replicates and archives data for Office 365, but if the data is corrupted or deleted, those problems are replicated, and secondary copies of data are required for full safety. Also, if there's archived data, even in a cloud, if that archived data is accidentally deleted, the data you might not be able to recover it. Likewise, sharing of data is a feature, but Office 365 doesn't prevent unauthorized movement of data by careless or disgruntled employees or by hackers. There's no recognition of sensitive data, so credit card or health information in an email can be hacked. Email security and data security may not meet your corporate data retention policies. Data recovery is less granular than most businesses prefer. And Office 365 allows recovery of data, but not collaboration information. So that sort of sets the scene, sets the table. But Jamie's going to talk about a solution that Carbonite offers that really, really helps solve a lot of these problems. And with that, Jamie, I'm going to hand it over to you. So whenever you're ready, take it away.
Perfect. Thanks so much for setting the stage there as far as the adoption of Office 365 and how quickly that's growing, and then also setting the stage on some of the challenges and limitations that Office 365 presents. As we go through this presentation, I want you to kind of take away from it, again, what does Microsoft offer your customers already, and where are you currently exposed, and where can you as partners fill in gaps for your customers, either in a consulting role or by providing data protection solutions for them. Now, many of you probably know Carbonite at large as a data protection company, and we've been focused on providing a suite of data protection solutions to partners to bring to their small and medium-sized businesses for years. This is the latest introduction of our offering that includes protection of the cloud-based data in Office 365 as well. So we'll show you how that works, and we'll show you how it integrates with some of our existing solutions as well. So the first thing that I really want you to kind of take away is, why do I need to protect data in Office 365 anyways? Right? A lot of people think, well, I moved to the cloud, and so there's really, my problem is solved. Microsoft has the data, they keep it in a really durable storage. Maybe they have redundancy built in. What's the problem that I need to solve as a partner? What's the exposure that my customers have for data loss? And the truth of the matter is that Microsoft is providing a high availability solution. They are making sure that Office 365 is available. They are making sure that the data that you store there is durable and it can be accessed when it's necessary. But Microsoft isn't looking at the data itself and actually understanding when data is deleted, if it was done intentionally, if it was done unintentionally as an accident, or if it was even done maliciously by an employee that's trying to delete important documents or hide something nefarious that they may be doing. Microsoft has no visibility into this. And so this is where data protection solutions come in to help close the gap. So if we kind of take a look through, what is Microsoft really providing and what is it where they're breaking down? I take a step back and I look at how we got to Office 365 today. So if we take a step back in time, maybe 5 or 10 years ago, what you'd find is that we were all running Microsoft systems on premise. Right? We had an Exchange service running on premise, Active Directory system, SharePoint systems, and a bunch of file servers. Those have really morphed to the cloud now. Right? Exchange on-premise has become Outlook and Exchange Online. SharePoint on-premise has become SharePoint Online. The file servers that we've all been running and using as file shares for years has morphed into more of a OneDrive or SharePoint component. And as that's moved to the cloud, Microsoft has solved what I call the hardware problem. Right? No longer are you responsible for a failed hard drive and how you're going to recover from data loss in that scenario. Or no longer do you have to think about how you're going to scale the environment and how that Exchange server is going to grow in terms of data size and number of CPUs that's required and amount of memory as an organization grows. Right? That hardware and the physical infrastructure problem is gone in the cloud. However, just like you backed up Exchange Online, Exchange in an on-premise environment because you wanted to make sure that if somebody deleted their mailbox or deleted a folder, that you could quickly get that back. And just like you always required having a granular restore capability because you knew there was more than just hardware failures that you were protecting against, but you were protecting the actual data as well, these problems have not been solved by Microsoft. These are still your responsibility or your customer's responsibilities to solve for. So again, I really break it down to say, no longer in a cloud-based environment of Office 365 do you need to protect against hardware failures. However, you do need to protect against data loss. And this is where our solution comes in to close the gap. So some of the use cases that you need to think about and adapt your data protection strategy to cover is what happens when somebody leaves the company. Right? You likely have a process where you need to archive their data or have it accessible for some period of time. However, once you deactivate that license in Office 365, the data is not kept in perpetuity by Microsoft. You need to have a process around this. This is a great example where having a backup copy of all that data can solve this problem. And we'll talk about some of the restore options and how this data is much more accessible to you from a backup system actually than from what Office 365 can offer. Another is looking at insider attacks and malicious insiders. We've all had the scenario where a great employee or even a bad employee who has access to things can go and start deleting files. Maybe they have access to a SharePoint site where entire departments worth of data are stored in a shared location, but they were given admin rights because they needed to add files. Well, they can go and delete things. They can move things around. They can change permissions. They can cause bad things to happen. Right? If you think about OneDrive, employees can not only delete things from their OneDrive environment, but they can also delete it from their recycle bin. And this really leaves you as a company or you as the partner providing services to that company exposed. When you're dealing with, even things like malware and ransomware, anything that's kind of set up to sync to the cloud is going to sync those issues up as well, right? So maybe an end user's device unfortunately gets infected with ransomware. All of the files locally are corrupted with that as you're held ransom. That ransomware is also going to be detected as changed files and synced up to that OneDrive or that SharePoint site. Now, Microsoft offers some limited capabilities to roll back within OneDrive, but many people find that they don't fully meet the need. It's on a per file basis, or they have to go back to a previous point in time and risk losing data altogether as well. And then there are even things like accidental deletion, or what I find a lot is what I call users just forget where they put things and they think it's lost and they really just need your help finding it and getting it back to a place where they can quickly access it. Usually in a moment of need where they need some file quickly and don't have time to search or play around with it. So there's a lot of different capabilities that Microsoft doesn't provide that when you look at, you say, yeah, I need to have a solution when someone leaves for how I can restore their data across employees. And yeah, if somebody goes and deletes a lot of files from a SharePoint site or messes with the permissions, it's a lot easier for me to have a few button clicks to get that back than it is to do a hard drive recovery, or to really get in there and try to get into the details. So the way that we bring this to market is really in two ways. So on the Carbonite side, we have our Carbonite endpoint offering. Almost every end user in a company has a laptop or a desktop device where they're storing their data and accessing it from. You may have some of that data synced up to OneDrive. And so we offer a bundle solution. It's really an all-in-one encompassing solution for all of the endpoint data that lives locally on the laptop, and then all of the data that lives in the cloud as well. We call this combined offering Carbonite Endpoint 360. It's truly 360 degrees complete protection for all of your end user data, regardless of whether it's living locally on a device or in the cloud. And then for companies that have employees that are working completely in Office 365 and they have nothing stored locally on the laptops, we have our offering to purchase just Carbonite Backup for Office 365. It's a completely cloud-based solution with nothing for you to install on-premise or manage on-premise or no agents to deploy, and it'll back up your entire Office 365 tenant as required. So this gives you kind of the capability as you're talking to your customers to really understand where is their end user data living and how does it need to be protected, and then match the appropriate solution to their needs. And we have these different ones here that you can mix and match. So let's dive a little bit deeper into the actual features and functionality that we offer in Carbonite Backup for Office 365. So one of the biggest things that we find is that in Office 365, there's more than just OneDrive, SharePoint, and Exchange. Microsoft's pushing Teams really heavily. Lots of people are adopting more collaborative services like using planner boards to share things and using groups to collaborate in different ways, even creating project online sites as opposed to more traditional local project files. And so Carbonite has a really broad, extensive platform support. We cover these collaboration tools in addition to the more traditional Exchange and OneDrive files. And when I say this, we cover things like Teams, I'm really referring to all of Teams, not just the SharePoint site that lives behind Teams. So this means that as your companies are adopting more of these advanced tools, the Carbonite protection is keeping up as well to make sure that all of that data is protected for them. If this is something that your customers are planning on rolling out Teams in the next 6 to 12 months, maybe you'll even be helping them with that transition, it's a great opportunity to get in there and make sure that their data protection strategy is aligned with their technology decisions of where their data will be living. A backup system is only as good as the restore capabilities that you have access to. So Carbonite offers a wide array of restore options for how you're going to get the data back. So we can do everything from, say, an entire SharePoint site or an entire user's OneDrive or an entire user's mailbox, down to individual items, an individual mail item, an individual file of a version of a file in OneDrive, all the way down to the most granular level. So this means that no matter what happens to the user, whether they accidentally deleted their entire mailbox, a folder of their mailbox, or just one particular file from a SharePoint site, you can get back the data that they need in the way that they're expecting to get it back. Everything in our system is managed centrally, and there's nothing for you to deploy on-premise. So some of the other solutions in the market will actually take the data from the cloud and they'll replicate it down to an on-premise data store where you're spinning up hard drives and servers to really accommodate that backup storage. Ours is a completely cloud-to-cloud solution. So when you're deploying Carbonite Backup for Office 365, and I'll give you a walkthrough how you do that in a demo in a moment, you won't have to actually worry about running any installations, deploying any agents, procuring any hardware. You're just going to enable the service, and everything happens in a cloud-to-cloud fashion. We do support different options for retention, so we can back up 4 times a day, and we can keep data for 1 year or many years as to meet your regulatory requirements. So this really gives you the control as you're deploying the solution to 1, make sure everything's protected in the environment, 2, make sure that you can get it back in the way that you need it, and 3, make sure that you can have a hands-off management approach where you don't have to install or manage anything on premise. So really, it's a simple solution. Like I said, as soon as you enable the service, we're going to scan the Office 365 environment. You can choose what you want to back up, or you can use a default policy that will select everything. The data is always encrypted, forever incremental changes, so only changes are detected in the environment, and then it'll be stored in that secure fashion in the Carbonite cloud. So Office 365 means a lot of different services, and I think this is one of the really interesting points that's changing in the industry over the past few years. Microsoft is heavily pushing more and more collaboration tools out to end users, and they all have good purpose. Right? Microsoft knows that users need better ways to manage to-do lists, or to create groups, or to communicate with different email addresses, or share files. And so Microsoft's always pushing out new tools that help improve end-user productivity. And businesses really want users to adopt these tools. Right? There's a reason Microsoft developed them. They solve a real-world problem, and they help improve productivity. So users should be adopting them, and businesses should want users to adopt them. The problem that this causes is data sprawl. So data is no longer stored in one centralized location. There's no longer one file server that's the keys to the kingdom where everything is. It's now all over the place. You have projects that are spun up that use planner boards for tracking important tasks, and they use a group for storing certain files, and they communicate using Teams chat. And of course, everybody still sends emails and has contact lists that are stored in that environment as well. So as you have this data sprawl happening in a small business, what's happened is that in many cases, IT doesn't even know what services are in use, right? If you were to take a poll of the average small business, most users don't know the right names of the services, or they don't really know what they're even using. They just know that they click this button and it works. And so it's becoming increasingly hard for an IT administrator or for an MSP that's managing IT for a customer to even know which services they need to back up. And users can simply adopt and create a new planner board at any point in time, or create a new team within their Teams environment at any point in time. So this really pushes the need for having an auto-discovery solution that can automatically pick up changes and new objects that are created in the environment, but also making sure that you do actually have protection for all these services. So it's really important that as you plan on rolling out things like Teams, and Teams comes with planner boards and comes with task lists, and all these different pieces, that you actually have a technology that's paired to properly protect that data and properly restore it as well. So there's a lot of challenges that you have to face when you're picking the right solution and when people are trying to understand what their data protection should be. There's lots of studies out there. Microsoft themselves will even say, just because the data is in OneDrive doesn't mean you don't need to back it up, right? They're really clear about what they do and what they don't do. And so things like, we talked about earlier, ensuring that they provide a high availability solution is something that they absolutely do. But differentiating between intentional deletion and accidental or malicious file deletion is something they're pretty clear that they can't do and they can't solve for you. So you need to make sure that you have solutions for these different items. And then again, when you're looking at restore, it's important that you really understand how you're going to want to restore data. And I always look at this as in the moment of need, when it's time to do a restore, you don't actually know what situation that's going to be. Is it 7 o'clock at night on a Friday and all you have is your phone and somebody really needs some critical file? Well, you need a way to initiate that restore to them really quickly. Or is it that there was a mass issue and lots of SharePoint sites were deleted and you need to get them all back in bulk? Well, you need a way to do that quickly and easily as well. And maybe actually what you need is not to put the data back into Office 365, but you just need a way to download it locally, save it to your hard drive, or provide it directly to a user in an email. We can provide these types of solutions as well for you. So as we bring this to market, we offer a few different ways that we price and package it. So like I mentioned, we have our Carbonite Endpoint 360 offering on the right, which is a bundle of both of our endpoint backup solution, so an agent that you silently deploy to all of your laptops and desktops, supports Mac and Windows, and it's continuously detecting file changes, encrypting those files, and replicating them to the cloud for easily storage and restore options. In the middle, we have as well as including all of the Office 365 protection there. We also have in the middle just the protection for Office 365. So if you're in an environment where everything is stored natively in the cloud, no contents created locally, you can purchase just the Office 365 backup. Or if you have a customer who's not using Office 365 at all, or maybe they're not yet using Office 365, we do have our Carbonite Endpoint solution, which is going to be the protection for all of the endpoints in the environment, Mac and Windows computers, that's going to scan, encrypt that data, and send it up to the cloud. For all of our offerings here, you'll see that we have them available in two flavors. We have our standard edition, which will come with 100 gigabytes of data per user. We then pool it across the entire account, so you don't have to worry if you have one user with 20 gigs and one user with 120 gigs. It's pooled for your convenience. And then we also have our advanced edition, which comes with an unlimited amount of storage for each device. So that means you really have nothing to worry about as far as how much data that company is generating or what the rate of growth is. You're simply licensing each user and getting all of the data. So hopefully with these different options, you can kind of start and think about which of your customers would be a good fit for which ones, right? We find a lot of customers value the Endpoint 360 offering because they know they have some data stored locally on at least some remote employees in the company or people that travel. They've got everybody using Office 365 in some fashion, whether it's focused on using OneDrive or SharePoint, or they're adopting things like Teams and Planner. And then we have some people that haven't yet adopted Office 365. They're either running in an on-premise Exchange environment or relying on something like a G Suite for their cloud-based services, and they might just need to protect the data that's stored locally on the endpoint. So again, a few different offerings here so that you can match the needs of your customers to our offerings and provide the right solution to them. All right, so in reality, we know that we're not the only ones that can back up Office 365. So where do we really win, and how does our solution differentiate against those in the market? So the three things I really want you to take away is first, the comprehensive data protection that we offer. So I've mentioned this a few times, but as Microsoft is pushing more and more collaboration and productivity tools out to the small business, you need to make sure that your data protection strategy aligns to that. And so we have the most comprehensive suite of protection, including things like Teams and Planner and Project, all of the file versions, all of the file permissions, and more. Second is you need to make sure that your data is always protected and secure. And we really focus ourselves and pride ourselves on our robust encryption and security options that we have included there. So all of our data is always encrypted using AES 256-bit encryption, but we have some additional options for you to use. For example, if you want to bring your own encryption key, we can hook into your own Azure Key Vault instance so that you hold the encryption key to that data, and you never have to worry about someone else having that. We use single sign-on and Azure Active Directory logins. So as opposed to having to manage and maintain a separate list of usernames and passwords to log into the system, you'll use your existing Azure AD credentials, just like you were logging into your email today. And that works both for partners as well as end customers. And one of the things that's really unique that we have is what we call a permissions-only restore. So as we're backing up all of the content from Office 365, we're also able to detect the metadata around things like which files are shared with who in the organization. And in addition to restoring the content, we can restore the permissions on all those files as well. So this makes sure that when you're doing a restore, nobody's accidentally getting access to the wrong data or being put in the wrong place. You have just as secure of an environment as when you started. And then third is the ease of management. So especially for partners, we offer a multi-tenant partner portal experience where you can see all of your customers in one place, see how their backups are performing, and make or take any actions that are required. So if you're completely managing the backups for them or managing the Office 365 for them, you can do that centrally in one place. Or if you want to give them access to just their console or just their tenant, you can always expose that to them as well. We do have an object auto discovery. So as new SharePoint sites or OneDrive users or mailboxes are added to the environment, you can configure rules to either automatically pick them up or to exclude them based on these rules that you set. So really you can have control so that you don't have to take a hands-on approach and add users or script anything with an API anytime a new user or a new object is added to Office 365. And then grouped with that is our intelligent notifications. When doing backups with Office 365, getting errors, at least in our system, is quite rare, right? It's a pretty stable environment. But every once in a while, things need to get reset or some file permission was changed in the environment that can cause a backup failure and need to be modified and rectified. And so we have intelligent notifications that are built in here, where you can do things like say, only notify me if a backup job has failed twice. That's when I'm going to take action. Maybe it was a temporary environmental issue. So this just makes it easier for you to have a hands-off management approach, a very passive approach as a partner, but still making sure that you're not leaving your customers exposed in that case. Or if you're selling directly to the end customers and they're managing it themselves, they can certainly take advantage of those same notifications and that same capability. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into a demo here, and you can see how the product actually works. So first, we'll start at the very beginning and walk you through how you actually set up and start initiating a backup. So as you can imagine, it all starts with a provisioning email, where you'll simply click to log in for the first time. Now this is important because the first time that you receive that email, the first thing we ask you to do is actually convert to using an Office 365 login. So like I mentioned, we really pride ourselves on taking security as a first-class citizen in how we bring solutions to market. And so using Azure Active Directory logins means one less password to manage. It means if a user leaves your company or leaves the company, their login is automatically revoked and shut off from the system because we're not using a separate login. So it provides a better level of security for you. Also, if you had things like multi-factor authentication or strong passwords or different VPN requirements set up in your Azure AD environment, those are all automatically inherited by our system as well. The other thing that happens is that you'd be asked to authorize us to install an app profile within your Office 365 tenant, and that's what we'll use to communicate to do our authentication into the service from there on out. As far as choosing what you want to back up, we offer two modes. We have an express mode, where you'll simply choose which services or which applications you want to back up, and then we have an advanced mode. The advanced mode lets you get extremely granular as far as which specific objects in Office 365 you want to back up, and that's where you'll create some of those auto-discovery rules to meet really granular rules. So we have a really simple mode, great for small businesses, and then an advanced mode for anyone that has a more complex requirement that requires that level of granularity. And I'll show you both. So we'll start with express mode. Like I mentioned, it's really simple. You're just going to choose which service you want or application you want to back up, and then we'll get everything within that application. Once you've chosen that, we'll go out and scan and start doing all of the backups, and we'll show you progress throughout. Now, your Exchange may or may not have more data than your OneDrive or than a SharePoint site, and so you can see different progress indicators here on each application. So when you're doing whether it's that first backup or whether it's incremental backups, you can always see exactly what's going on. You can dive in and get a lot more detail. So for example, if I click into this Exchange Online backup job, I can see exactly how many objects were backed up. I can see if anything was a failure or anything was skipped for some reason, and you can even get reports about exactly what that is. Now, a common challenge that people have is they say, well, my OneDrive backup, seems to be, not finishing, and why is that taking so long? So you can dive in and see on a per user basis or, at a really granular level, how is the backup progressing? In this case, you can see, okay, maybe it's that first user there, that Jay Zajac, and that OneDrive is taking a long time because she has a lot more data in her OneDrive. So you have all of this visibility at your hands to see exactly what's going on. And then you can choose how you want your notifications sent. Like I mentioned, you could choose that you want a notification after every successful backup. It's a lot of emails, but that's your choice. You may feed it into some sort of auditing system as proof of success, or just be notified on failure emails as well. So you can set up different rules to utilize these capabilities to your needs. You may also choose to feed things like failure emails into a PSA system, so you can really log that work and track it with some of your techs as well as far as resolution and remediation of any issues. That's really it for a backup flow, right? Choose what you want. The system goes off and does everything. It's intentionally simple. There's intentionally not a lot for you to have to do, but we do give you all the visibility so that you know exactly what's going on. So let's show you how you can actually do a restore. So when we go to do a restore, All good restores start with the big restore button in the top left corner. A pretty simple way to get started. You'll choose which application you want to restore data from. Right? Anything that you had backed up would be available here as a tile for you to choose from. And then you're going to start selecting which content you want. Now, there's two types of people in this world. If you think about Windows File Explorer, you can tell the two types of people. You have people that simply click into the search button and type the name of the file that they want to search for it. And you have people that expand every folder to go and navigate for the content that they want. We essentially have both models here as well. So you'll see on the left, you can do more of a search capability where you know the name of the content that you're looking for, and then you'll be able to choose the recovery point. Or you can also go back in time, choose the recovery point first. Let's say you know that you want to go back to how things looked last Tuesday. You'd choose the restore point from Tuesday, and then you'd continue on to choose the actual content that you want. Like I mentioned, you can go as granular as required, so down to individual emails, individual files, individual SharePoint objects to get it back. Or you can up-level it and do an entire folder or an entire mailbox or many mailboxes all at once. So it's really here, again, depending on that scenario that you're in when you need to restore the data, making sure that we're giving you the capabilities that you need to fulfill that requirement. All right, so once you've chosen the content that you want, you have a few optional configurations here for a little bit more advanced settings or a little bit more configurability on how that data is going to be restored. So you'll see you have options for whether you want to restore it back to the original location or perhaps put it into a new location. This is a great scenario around things like when an employee has left the company. And so now maybe you need to take Joe's mailbox or a folder from Joe's OneDrive and restore it to the person who's taken over for Joe, and it's going to carry on with that project. We can also do cross-application recoveries. So for example, let's say Joe has an important folder of content that he was working on when he left, and as opposed to restoring it to another user's OneDrive, maybe it's a team of people that will be taking over that project. And so maybe you want to deploy it to a common shared SharePoint site for others to access. So you can go across services such as OneDrive to SharePoint as well. Again, it just gives you a lot more flexibility so that when you need to do that restore, when you need to access the data, you know that you have the tools at your disposal to meet that requirement. A couple other things here that I'll point out that are really unique. You'll see on the right side here, there's an option of whether you want to actually restore all of the content and the file permissions or just the file permissions. So one thing that's become kind of a new problem with services where you can share files, either share files internally or externally, is that it creates the opportunity to make mistakes. And mistakes can come in a couple of ways. One, users can share files with too many people. So maybe you accidentally shared an important HR document with a group of people when it should have just been one person. Or maybe it's a SharePoint site and you accidentally shared it with too few people. Maybe you were making a small change to the permissions and accidentally deleted everybody's access. There really aren't great ways to recover the permissions within SharePoint and OneDrive. A lot of times you have no choice but to simply delete all the permissions and then go recreate them one by one, which is obviously manual process and very error prone, and extremely frustrating to end users as they may be going a long period of time without the right access. And so we have a unique feature here, which is what we call our security-only restore. What this does is it will actually iterate through all the file permissions. It'll keep the content as is, so it's quite fast. No need to actually move content over the wire. But it will iterate through all the file permissions and set them back to the point that you chose. So for example, somebody shows up to work and can't get into a SharePoint site, as opposed to really investigating why their permissions were restored, or perhaps you identify that lots of people lost access all of a sudden, you could just roll back the permissions to yesterday when they were working. The content remains the same and unchanged, and now the right people have access to that site. So this is kind of a new capability, but I think as people start to adopt more sharing services and start to use them more heavily, it's going to become more and more of a requirement and more of a need for you to solve. The final thing I'll point out here on Restore is that we always allow you to specify, it's optional, a comment, which is stored in the audit logs and is available for you to pull as well. So if you're acting as an MSP on behalf of your customers, this is a great place to put things like a ticket number or the name of the tech that's working on that restore, so you have complete transparency about what's happening with your data, where it's being restored, who's touching it, and how it's working. So this is, again, just a nice feature for auditability and for transparency into your data. No matter what you're doing in the system, you can monitor all the jobs, whether it's a backup job running in the background, a restore job that you just initiated, or anything else that might be going on, a file download. You can see all of that information here. You can see how long things are taking, the duration of jobs, and you can download really simple or really detailed logs. So if you want a detailed log of every file that was touched and every object that was included in a backup, you can get that here. Again, complete transparency into what's happening with your data and your customers' data, and making sure that you have access to that in a centralized web dashboard. All right, so I skipped over a couple of the advanced options as I went through that. I'll just take a step back and give you a brief overview of some of that. Really, these are advanced options that if you have a particularly tricky customer or some high level of regulation that you're trying to meet and you need to really customize the solution to do that, these are where the advanced options are great for you to get into. You don't need to use them. You don't need to use them on every customer, but they're there when you do need to do that. So the first is, I mentioned at the beginning, our Express Mode setup, where it's really easy. You just choose the application you want to protect and you're off and running. We also have our Advanced Mode. The Advanced Mode lets you set rules and really detailed filters about what you want to back up. You can create these rules based on almost any Azure Active Directory element. So if you want to say, only back up OneDrive for business accounts that are for people in the marketing department that have an E3 license assigned and are in the US, you can create that rule. And any new person that's added to the organization that meets that requirement is automatically selected into that rule for backup. If you want to say, only back up SharePoint sites that don't have the name test in them to keep some of your internal IT testing accounts excluded, you can set that as well. You can use and or operators to really get as granular as you need. Again, not something you necessarily need to deploy on every customer. Many people start with the Express Mode, but if that need does come up and does arise, you can utilize this. If you do have a requirement to hold your own encryption key, whether it's a preference or a regulation for that customer, you can simply bring your own Azure Key Vault. And you see here on the image that you'll simply provide us with a link to it, what the key identifier, client ID, and client secret is in Azure Key Vault, and we'll use that key as the master encryption key for everything configured in that tenant. So again, not a requirement. You can use the Carbonite managed keys, which are stored in the Carbonite Azure Key Vault instance. So they're still separate from the data in a secure manner. However, this does give you an additional level of control if you need that for some or all of your customers. And then we've also built some things into the application to help make sure that it can scale. So one of the great advantages of being a cloud-to-cloud service is that you don't have to worry about the scalability of on-premise hardware or CPUs or network or any of these things. It's completely running off the Azure backbone and into the Carbonite cloud instance. However, if you want to make sure that things like the amount of service accounts that you're using need to scale up because you have a large customer or a large amount of data, we have ways of pooling accounts and being really efficient with how we handle the amount of requests that we're making to Office 365 so that we can keep that data up to date in our environment. So we have a lot of advanced options here that really can meet those needs, help us scale to meet some of your larger customer requirements, both from a compliance standpoint as well as an auditability and transparency perspective, but then also from a scalability perspective and how we actually handle that data for you. All right, well, I hope that during this webinar so far, you've learned a lot. You've understood what Microsoft protects in Office 365 and what those gaps are, how the Carbonite solution can help fulfill those gaps, and actually even see in the demo and the walkthrough how easy it is to get started with configuring a backup, doing a restore, and making sure that you have all of the different advanced features that you require at your disposal. So at this time, I'm sure some of you typed in some questions, and we'll go ahead and get all of those answered for you as well.
Jamie, thanks so much. That was great stuff. And we actually do have a few questions that came in. So with a couple of minutes left here, I'd like to be able to ask those. And the first one is, what is the default retention policy for deleted items in Office 365?
Yeah, it's a great question. So Office 365 by default keeps items in the recycle bin for 30 days. Some people may have a second stage bin set up to go slightly beyond that. But once you do hit those points, the data will be deleted from you. So typically you're only getting about 30 days of recovery from Office 365.
And then are you able to restore permissions on files?
Yeah, so this actually I think breaks down into two ways. So one, when we do restore files, whether it's to SharePoint or a Teams site or OneDrive, we do by default restore all of the file permissions. If you're doing it across users, so in the case that Joe left the company and you need to restore his OneDrive to someone else, you can map and assign those permissions to somebody else. So when the new user gets them, they have access to their files. And then the final scenario is in the case that you only want to restore the permissions. And so in this case, we don't even restore the content or the files itself if those are already in the environment. But what we do is we walk through the file permissions and reset them to the point in time that you chose to recover from. So it's kind of important in both respects. One, you want to make sure that when you're doing a straight file recovery, that the permissions are preserved. And yes, we do that. And then the second is the scenario where the files are there, but you need to fix the permissions, and we can do that as well.
Good stuff. And then how is data encrypted with Carbonite?
Yep, so all of the data is always encrypted. We use AES 256-bit encryption. There's no option to not encrypt the data in the solution. And then the choice that you have to make is simply whether you want to use the Carbonite default encryption or if you want to bring your own encryption key. Still using AES 256-bit encryption, just a matter of where that master key is going to live in our environment or in yours.
Excellent. And then the last question that we have is Carbonite a multi-tenant environment for an MSP?
Yes. So for MSPs, we do offer a multi-tenant partner portal where you'll manage all of your customers. And so it is a multi-tenant system at large. And then each of your customers gets their own tenant, but you have that management layer on top. So you don't have to actually remember username and password for every single customer of yours. You'll log into that partner portal with your corporate Office 365 login, and then you'll be able to access all your customers in one spot. So it actually makes a really nice experience for MSPs to manage across the board without having to have separate portals.
Excellent. Jamie, thank you so much. And I want to let everyone who joined us today know that we have now reached the conclusion of today's program, but today's Channelcast and its content are copyright 2019 by the Channel Company LLC or its affiliates. All rights are reserved and all trademarks are the property of their respective owners. Any rebroadcast or redistribution of today's Channelcast or any portion thereof without the prior written consent of the Channel Company LLC is prohibited. And again, just want to take a second to thank you all for attending today's Channelcast, brought to you by the Channel Company and Carbonite. And also on behalf of my guest, Jamie Zajac, and our virtual production team, thanks so much for your time and enjoy the rest of your day.